Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Please keep eating, keep drinking. We're just going to go ahead and get started so we have enough time to get everybody, get your questions in and make sure we get enough time with our speaker here. But please, go ahead and finish everything. I know you got the dessert coming up, and you may still get another glass of wine if you're really nice to the waiters over there as well, in addition to the coffee. I'm Keith Richburg, the president of the club. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for supporting our events. We're glad to be here. We're glad to be anywhere at this stage. I want you to know that, and please keep supporting our FCC events. You can find everything on fcchk.org. Besides today's event, we've got a really good one coming up. I see on the 22nd. It's a club lunch. Talk with the Hong Kong Ballet's artistic director and the executive director are coming here. So we're going to have a little bit of culture here at the club. We've also got a club screening coming up on April the 3rd. It's the third of the trilogy by Craig McCurry. You know, he's done these World War II films about Hong Kong. The third in the trilogy is called Battle Box. So that's coming up as well. But keep your eye out for other things because, you know, Hong Kong is opening up now, and we got a lot of people coming through Hong Kong, and so we get them at the last minute, and we invite them to come here to be speakers. Our current speaker is not somebody coming through Hong Kong. He's back in Hong Kong. I say back because he was here before, and I think he's spoken at the club before as well.
Yes.
So not your first time here. It's Wang Xiangwei. You may have known him. He was the first Chinese editor of the South China Morning Post. And then you may have been reading his columns more recently from Beijing. He's back now as Associate Professor of Practice at the Hong Kong Baptist University in the Department of Journalism. And he is also a keen observer of all things going on in China, as you know if you follow his column, which unfortunately is no longer in SCMP, but we can find it on Substack.
I used to write a weekly column when I was
correct.
SCMP, and because now I'm teaching, so I have reduced the frequency to once a month on the first Monday of every month on the op-ed page.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you know, as we have our professional committee is the one that organizes these events. So by the way, if you have any suggestions for speakers, just email the professional committee or myself. But we were sitting around saying, you know, the two meetings, the Lianghui, were going on in China. We're coming up for China. And we said, who are we going to get to can analyze China? Nobody knows anything about China. And then we all paused, and everybody said at one time, oh, you got to get Xiangwei. He's here. And you may have known, we did a Zoom talk with Xiangwei some months ago, maybe a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, you promised that if you were actually back in Hong Kong full time, you would come and do this full time. So here we are, and we've got somebody who can actually tell us what the heck is going on in China these days. So I'm going to just ask a few questions first, and I'll open it up to you. But my opening question is the two meetings. You know, I know in the Western media they sometimes say this is rubber stamp and everything's decided beforehand, which may be true. But things do happen there that kind of set the tone for the next year or two in China. So what are your takeaways from this session?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Keith, for having me. The first time I was here was back 10 years ago when I was appointed as the editor-in-chief. I remember I stood here. You know, I think that's a very interesting question. What is happening with the Lianghui? I think according to the Chinese state media reports, the most important thing is that our great leader is unanimously re-elected for the third term. The emphasis is on unanimous. I mean, even in our neighboring country in North Korea, is 99.9%. But we insisted on unanimous. On a serious note, my biggest takeaway from the two sessions is that China, actually, I wrote about this last month on one of my Substacks, that China will first of all, China will focus on reviving the economy, which was seriously battered because of the 3-year COVID. And secondly, that China will adopt a very conciliatory approach, both at home and abroad. I'm going to talk about China's efforts to reviving the economy first. And then that signal was made by various top leaders, including President Xi Jinping. But the person who gave very clear signal is the new Premier Li Qiang. And he gave this press conference a couple of days ago. You know, China's Premier's press conference is the only annual media event where China's Premier or any other top leader for China, for that matter, would meet with the press and answer the questions. But because of this significance, the press conference is very strictly chronographed, with every question posed to the Prime Minister being pre-screened. So by watching what kind of questions being asked of the Premier, you could basically tell what kind of emphasis, what kind of things that he will do. And at this press conference, about 10 questions posed to the new Prime Minister, and 9 of them are related to economy, and 1 question for Hong Kong, as usual, and 1 question for Taiwan. So I think, first of all, the Prime Minister sent a very clear message that he will focus on reviving the economy. The second thing is that it's also very interesting that his press conference ran only about 1 hour, 20 minutes, much shorter than the press conference that his predecessors gave, including the Keqiang and the Wen Jiabao, which usually those press conferences ran more than 2 hours. And the reason for this is that he didn't want to sort of spend a lot of time to talk about China's international relations or diplomacy, which means that either he believes that he doesn't have a bigger say in that matter, or he just wants to focus on talking about the economy. And when he answered questions, he mainly talked about how he would do a better job to help the private sector. As you know, the confidence of China's private sector cannot be lower in China. But the importance of the private sector is crucial to China's effort to revive the economy. In China, we have this saying regarding the importance of the private sector. It's called, you got to remember this number, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The private sector accounts for 50% of China's tax collections, 60% of China's GDP, 70% of China's investment in technical upgrades, 80% of China's employment, 90% the total number of China's enterprises. This gives you the picture that without stimulating the private sector, the China's economy will not be revived. I think that's the kind of a message. But for that to happen, that comes to the second point I want to make, is that China will have to adopt a conciliatory approach at home and abroad. At home, as I mentioned earlier, for China to revive the economy, China will have to roll out more friendly policies towards the private sector. And then abroad, because our great leader has already secured his 3rd term, now China wants to improve its image. I mean, that's exactly what happened. That's not long ago, China brokered this agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And now he's flying to Moscow on Saturday, and he's also prepping up a call with Zelensky, and there also be a phone call between Xi Jinping and U.S. President Biden. I think he's now from his point of view, I guess, that now that this election process is over. Now at home, that China will focus on the economy. Abroad, I think China wants to play a more positive role to amend, to change the kind of negative views now the people in the West have against China. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely, but I want to follow up on a couple of things there. We'll go to foreign policy next, but just staying in domestic policy for a moment, you talked rightly about the importance of the private sector in China, but two of the headlines I saw in the FT and elsewhere is they want the state council, they want the Communist Party to strengthen control over the finance sector, and they want the party to strengthen control over the tech sector. So isn't that kind of incompatible with letting the free market and private enterprise fly?
That's a very good question. I think that's the question on the minds of many people, but you have to understand this, is that even before Xi Jinping came to power, the party already had leading small groups supervising every sector of the Chinese economy. President Xi has made this very public. And that's one thing. The second thing is that, even as someone who have written and reported about China for the past 30 years, I was still a bit of a surprise to see that Xi has kept the governor, the central bank governor, Yi Gang, and also the finance minister, Liu Kun. I mean, because previously, those two people have reached their retirement age, but they're well respected in the industries. And then both of them are not members of the Central Committee. But in the end, he decided to keep Yi Gang for another term of 5 years, and also the Liu Kun. So I think that also sent a message that even though that he strengthens control of the party over almost every level of the society, but still he wants to keep the capable technocrats to be in charge and to ensure that they have enough capable talents to complete the task of reviving the economy. That's my reading.
And by setting a 5% growth target, is that lowering the bar, just to lower expectations, so if they can get 5.5, 6, 7, they can say they've done a miraculous job? Or does that just tell everybody in all the provinces, hey, just make sure you get 5%?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the figures, the data in the first 2 months were just out yesterday, and it showed that the momentum is building up. But however, that as I said earlier, the economy was hit so bad during the 3 years of COVID. I think they have to be realistic when they set the 5% growth target. I mean, because right now the unemployment is very serious, and there was a figure talking about 20-25% among the youth employment, and we have, I have heard from friends in China. I mean, even the tech companies are laying off people. So China, we have to do much more to get the confidence of the private sector back. But because what happened over the past 3 years, the regulatory crackdown on the private sector. As I mentioned in one of my columns, the mere words of supporting the private sector is not enough. I think the government will have to do much more. And to me, we talk about this, all the time over the past few weeks, and sort of people ask me what kind of signal that the government needs to send to show that they are serious about the private sector. Now I'm no longer with SAMP, so I can say this, is that maybe, that signal could come that in the form of China will have Jack Ma of Alibaba going back to China. I mean, I think that's something probably will happen in the next 2 or 3 months. I mean, because the word is that the new prime minister knows, Jack Ma pretty well. I mean, I think, I think what's going to happen is that you have to see, I mean, we all have to see that the government needs to send more positive signal. And I'm sure that in the next few months, you will see, both the rhetoric and measures, will get stronger to focus on the economy.
If you read a journalist or a columnist long enough, you can tell when they're mad. And you were in Hainan with your family on vacation and got caught up in the zero COVID trap. I read your column and I said, he's mad. So when you see them now saying, zero COVID was a success, zero COVID was a resounding success.
I know.
What do you think?
I mean, now you mentioned it, I'm still mad about being stranded in Hainan for 20 days. I mean, even though I stayed in a very nice hotel with the pool and everything, I can still enjoy myself. But the fact that I couldn't just leave, I mean, that's really upsetting. But I think that is something that lots of people are not happy about, the kind of things being talked about in the official media and what is really happening in China. Just recently, somebody told me a joke, which I want to share with you, and it has some element of truth. It's saying right now in China that there are 3 Chinas. It depends on how you look at it. One is in the 7 o'clock primetime news in China in CCTV. It's called 新闻联播. This is the equivalent of NBC nightly news, like watched by 100 million people in China. And that's where the Chinese officials will announce their policies and their meetings with the heads of states are reported. So in this 7 to 7, it usually runs 30 minutes. So in the first 10 minutes, it showed the Chinese leaders are very busy. And in the next 10 minutes, it showed the Chinese people are very happy. And in the remaining 10 minutes, it's saying the rest of the world live in misery. And that's one. And the second China you see is the online. The online is not as many people have, outside China have expected. It's very lively. And right now it's dominated by the nationalistic sentiment, those leftist sort of sentiment. I mean, if you say anything nice about US, if you say anything about the West, you will be attacked. And then that's one China. If you spend time online, that's the one China you see. And then that's the real China you see when you go to China and you talk to people. And that's another China. So, that's something that I want to share with you is that when you read the media reports, you only learn one part of China. When you spend time online reading about China, that's another part of China. And if you watch China's state media reports, you get another China. So I mean, that's why it's getting increasingly difficult to have a correct reading about China. I mean, that's why you guys are lucky to have me here, sort of telling you, what is really happening in China.
Well, let me ask you a question, because from what I read, and again, I'm getting into that bubble you're talking about here, but from what I read from here, the Shanghai lockdown was a complete disaster. People weren't getting fed. That precipitated the later protest, et cetera, that led to the end of zero COVID. The guy who was in charge of that disaster is now the prime minister.
Yeah.
Other people in smaller provinces were fired because
Absolutely.
of zero COVID when people weren't getting enough food, et cetera. What's going on?
Okay, I mean, that's a very good question, because I have been asked about this question over the past few months, ever since that the speculation started, that Xi wanted him to become the new prime minister. First of all, I want to tell you is that I don't know the guy, so I'm not defending him. I'm not, First of all, I want to tell you is that what happened in Shanghai, the 2-month lockdown, had little to do with him. Even though he was the party secretary of Shanghai, but the decision was made by the great leader. And then let me start from the very beginning. Even before the lockdown of Shanghai, 2-month lockdown, Shanghai was often held up. Li Qiang was the party secretary. Shanghai was often held up as the best example in China in terms of pandemic control. What happened was that Shanghai executed what was called in the official media targeted controls, 精准防控. What is meant that if there is a local outbreak, say happened in the landmark building, if one infected person was traced to visit Dior in the landmark. And what Shanghai did was that they simply sent the CDC people to have that Dior shop locked down, instead of the practice of rest of China's provinces that the whole entire central was locked down, just purely for that individual case. That's what Shanghai did. And then I think that Shanghai did a very good job under Li Qiang to ensure the things that the things were a little bit normal than the rest of China. In terms of the Omicron, because it is so infectious that it's very difficult for any city to contain it. As soon as the infection was out of control. So the Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, even though she and Li Qiang were both Politburo members at the same political ranking, but in this case, because Sun Chunlan, the Vice Premier, she outranked Li Qiang in terms of pandemic control. So Sun Chunlan was sent by Xi Jinping to Shanghai. On the day she landed in Shanghai, she took over the pandemic control. And her favorite approach was to lock down. So over the past 3 years, whenever she appeared in any city, and that city will be under lockdown. So that was what happened. So then her people took over the control. I mean, that's why there was this 2-month lockdown. Then so Li Qiang was sidelined. I'm teaching communication. In my mind, that even though he was sidelined, he should have come out and speaking to his people, but he didn't. Because after the Shanghai was under lockdown, that neither Li Qiang nor the mayor of Shanghai appeared in the daily press conference during that 2 months. When New York was under lockdown, the Governor Cuomo, he chaired a press conference every day. I mean, even Carrie Lam chaired the sort of daily press conference every day. But then neither Li Qiang nor the mayor appeared in that daily press conference. I mean, that was more about their communication skills instead of being assigned the responsibility. And secondly, I wrote a piece in January arguing why Li Qiang will become a more capable prime minister than Li Keqiang, than his predecessor, for the following reasons. One is that he has the total trust of the president. I mean, this is very important. I mean, the question that are being asked a lot in China, inside China, not outside China, inside China is, now our president now has concentrated all his power in his hands. Will he, now the question being asked a lot inside China is, one, will he delegate power to others? He didn't do it when Li Keqiang was the prime minister. But however, he's most likely to delegate, empower Li Qiang to do more, because Li Qiang is one of his close allies. The other side of the coin is, because he has the total trust of the leader, so whenever Li Qiang proposes anything, that the president will be most likely to allow him to do things. That's one thing. The second thing is, if you watch the press conference Li Qiang gave, and if you dig through his background, he was born and grew up in Zhejiang province and held various leadership positions in the province before he was made the chief of staff to Xi Jinping when Xi Jinping was the party secretary of Zhejiang. Zhejiang, you have to know that Zhejiang is China's most dynamic province in China, in the whole country, where the private sector has thrived for the past 40 years. And he is seen as a pro-business, pragmatic guy. And I could give you a few examples. One is that after the lockdown was lifted in Shanghai, he knew that the Shanghai economy was badly hit, and also Shanghai's reputation has suffered. So one of the things he did is that he held one-on-one video conferencing with the global and Asia-Pacific CEOs of multinationals whose operations in Shanghai were seriously disrupted. And then he held this one-on-one video conferencing, reassuring them that Shanghai will help them. Secondly, that when Elon Musk wanted to build a gigafactory producing Tesla in China, several provinces, including Shanghai, were competing to get Elon Musk's attention. And then eventually Li Qiang, at that time was the party secretary of Shanghai, he managed to get Elon Musk's attention because for the first time he managed to persuade the Chinese state banks to lend a large sum of money to Elon Musk. Before that, it was very difficult for any wholly owned foreign enterprise to borrow large sums of money from the Chinese state banks, because first of all, the Chinese state banks were very reluctant to lend any money to wholly owned foreign enterprises in China. Secondly, the Chinese state banks, they always wanted personal guarantee of those loans from the owners of the foreign businesses. I was told it's not the foreign businesses, the owners of the foreign businesses, they don't like to give personal guarantees of loans. So in the end, because he was a capable technocrat, he managed to get Elon Musk to invest in Shanghai, and he make things very easy. He facilitated all the land acquisition, the hiring of people, the training, and everything. So it seemed to me that from what I just told you and from what I have heard, I believe that he's more capable and he's most likely to deliver than Premier Li Keqiang. I mean, his predecessor is also very good, but then again, he did not have the trust of the leader. It's just the same thing that if some little guys work as CEOs and then the chairman, you don't get along with your chairman, and then you will not get things done.
Before I ask you a foreign policy question, just a quick one on the domestic. I always think everything there is designed to send a signal. Nothing is, in these party Congress, NPC, nothing is by accident. There's a great scene, this great hall of the people, everybody standing, clapping. Xi Jinping, the great leader, as you call him, walks in. He pointed to one guy, Chief Executive John Lee. Was he saying, "I got your back," or was he saying, "You better watch yourself"?
Well, I guess sort of John Lee is very happy, and I guess the message is the former. I think it's very interesting that now I'm back in Hong Kong, because I was. I lived through the whole 3 years of COVID restrictions in Beijing, and it was really terrible. And I came back on November 27th, and at that time there was still mask mandates in Hong Kong, but then again I came back to Hong Kong from Beijing, whereas it was freezing cold. It's still cold today. So I feel very much different. That in a sense that over the past few months that I've been saying to my friends that this kind of thing is always relative. That now I'm back in Hong Kong. All I can see are the positives. The nice weather. I live in Wan Chai, walk on the promenades, and I can talk to friends about China's politics without looking over the shoulder, but then I've been speaking to most of my friends are very pessimistic. I see are positives. All they see are negatives about Hong Kong. I'm sorry, I have to go a big circle to answer your question. So what I'm saying is that now that we have a CE which has the trust of the leader. So now, from Beijing's point of view, that Hongkong's political stability has returned. So what should CE and the rest of us should do is that we should really focus on reviving the Hong Kong economy. I mean, that's the goal of the new prime minister in China, that China will focus on reviving the mainland economy. And I think that for Hong Kong, Hong Kong, I think CE should do the same. And now he has the trust of the leader.
Yeah. And one foreign policy question, then I'll open it up to the audience. So please get your questions ready. Something unusual happened at this party Congress where the great leader mentioned the United States, criticized the United States by name. That's never happened before. And then the new foreign minister, who was formerly the ambassador in the United States, said the U.S. has to put the brakes on, calling out the U.S. by name. This comes after the balloon incident, which was either a weather balloon or a spy balloon, depending on who you believe. I mean, it comes right before Tsai Ing-wen is supposed to be going to California to meet the speaker. I mean, what are we sliding towards inevitable conflict here, or what do you think's going on?
No, from my reading, that what Xi said and what Qin Gang said on China-U.S. relationship just show the frustrations that the Chinese leaders are having, against all this encirclement that, from Chinese point of view, is that the U.S. is doing towards China. And I'm glad you mentioned the spy blue incident. I mean, because ever since this happened, I'm very upset about this. So I want to talk about this. Is that this spy blue incident is exactly the thing that Biden and Xi agreed on in Bali back in November to solve. But in the end, it could have been easily solved that with Biden sort of pick up the phone to call Xi Jinping, or Xi Jinping pick up the phone calling Biden. None of that happened. Instead, both sides are to blame to, with no pun intended, blowing this whole thing out of proportion. Let me give you a timeline so that you could understand why this is really bad for China and for U.S. There's that on January 17th, that was at the Foreign Ministry, China's Foreign Ministry's press conference, daily press briefing, one of the foreign reporters asked the spokesperson on duty, Wang Wenbin, about Antony Blinken's trip to China. And at that time, Wang Wenbin's response was very warm. He was saying that, we warmly welcome Secretary Blinken's trip to China to follow up on the agreement made by Biden and Xi in Bali. And then on January 30th, another reporter asked the same question about Blinken's trip to China. Remember that was 2 days after the U.S. spy balloon, China's spy balloon entered the U.S. space on January 28th. And then that foreign ministry spokesperson, moaning, she was on duty. And she said she had no information to share. At that time, the U.S. media already reported Secretary Blinken was due to visit China on February the 6th. And then the U.S. side reported, ever since the Chinese balloon entered the U.S. space, the U.S. side called the Chinese, the charge d'affaires, was a French word, right?
Charge d'affaires.
Yeah. Charge d'affaires in the Chinese embassy in Washington, that about the spy balloon incident. And then the Chinese side did not respond for 2.5 days. And that really incensed the Americans, so they decided to make it public. So all of this, I'm telling you this timeline to show that both sides are equally to blame. First of all, that the fact that the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson refused to confirm Antony Blinken's trip to China just like 4 or 5 days before Blinken went to China. It tells you that, what does that tell you? It tells you that maybe the U.S. wanted something from China for the Blinken's trip, and China declined to oblige. And then the blue thing happened. And then U.S. President Biden was due to give the State of Union address a couple of days, 3 or 4 days later. So they decided to make China the piñata and then to blow this whole thing out of proportion. On the China side, the China's foreign policy, the operations of China's foreign ministry is guided by Zhou Enlai's dictum. Zhou Enlai is China's first prime minister. And he says to the effect that in diplomacy, there was no such thing as minor or irrelevant, which means everything occurs in the foreign policy is very important. So I'm sure that when the US State Department notified the Chinese embassy official, he must have sent a message to Foreign Minister Qin Gang. And Qin Gang, I'm sure Qin Gang must have forwarded a message to Wang Yi, right? China's highest ranking official. I mean, this is the kind of a message from US. So I'm sure, I mean, did Wang Yi forward this message to great leader? Did great leader see the message? Why didn't the great leader react? It's all kind of a sort of a mystery. But to me, as someone who's been writing and reporting on China-US relations for the past 30 years, I'm sort of mystified. I mean, this whole thing could easily be resolved by either side picking up the phone. And then you won't have this whole mess. Yeah.
Let's take your questions. For a start, can we go to the veranda first? I don't want our veranda friends to get lost. Anybody on the veranda have a question? Anybody? No? Anybody in here in the room have a question? Right here first.
I have just two simple questions. First, do you foresee any changes in the anti-corruption or the focus on the anti-corruption drive? And then second question, both of you guys have used the phrase great leader many times. Has Xi Jinping taken a new title?
Yeah, I mean, that's his new title. We're saying this just to answer your first question. I think the reason that President Xi has accumulated so much power, all the General Secretary has accumulated so much power in his hands is because of the anti-corruption. And he has been saying that at every available opportunity that he believed he has found the method of ensuring the Communist Party will rule for a long time, which is that to continue the anti-corruption. And in his words, the anti-corruption is always, ongoing. And secondly, about we always say it's our great leader. I mean, he is now being addressed in many reports. So I say, why not?
Let the record show I was only quoting my friend as I look as I look over my shoulder. The next question.
Hi, Shangwei.
Hi.
So I'm in contact with some of the third China that you talked about, and maybe they're self-selecting, which is why they talk to me. And one of the things that surprised me over the last few months is their expressed fear much more than I feel here or I hear from anyone else about an actual war in Taiwan, with Taiwan.
Oh.
So it's so much more tangible. They say things like, we're going to get blown back to the 1950s. These are the few people I speak to. To what extent is that a real fear in China? And to what extent might that mitigate some missteps regarding Taiwan?
That's a great question, and I've been asked about this question over the past 2 or 3 years. First of all, I want to tell you that in my mind, that China is not going to invade Taiwan. It's very unlikely to invade Taiwan in the next 10 years. I'm telling you why. But before I'm telling you why, I want to address this warmongering about China's imminent invasion of Taiwan. You are most likely to hear about China's imminent invasion of Taiwan, mostly from the generals in US, Australia, and the UK. They even give you specific years, saying the earliest to 2025, and then and possibly 2027 on the centenary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army. But where is the evidence? There was no such evidence. I mean, those those sort of generals from the U.S., Australia, and U.K. just saying this, just pick those numbers out of air. First of all, it's a great question that if you go to China, if you talk to the sensible people, none of the people will say that China is going to invade Taiwan. Why China wants to invade Taiwan? Right now. I mean, the Chinese economy is so bad, and they want to focus on reviving the economy. That's one thing. The second thing is, would go back to talk about those generals talking about the war. I mean, you guys are based in Hong Kong, and I'm sure you're all well plugged. So can you tell me when is the last time that you hear the generals in Taiwan saying that, oh, the Chinese are coming, they're going to take over Taiwan in 2025 or 2027? I mean, those generals from Taiwan, they are next on the line. They should know, I mean, whether, Chinese were going to take over Taiwan. And that's the first point. The second point is this, is that, right now people are talking about China, I mean, whether China is militarily capable of invading Taiwan or having a blockade or like the Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, whether China or US should bomb the chip-making factory and have the problem solved. I think that's not really the question, because ever since the People's Republic was founded, one of the PLA's mission is to get combat ready to take over Taiwan. Then again, I think the question you should ask is, can or will China withstand the unprecedented sanctions the rest of the world will impose on China if China does such thing? Right now, I don't think China, just on that point, I don't think the Chinese economy can withstand such a Western sanctions. I mean, that's just one added point. I mean, the second thing is, all this talk about China's, Beijing's invasion of Taiwan is because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, on that point, I agree with the Chinese arguments that there is no comparison. That, to me, is that I don't see China will take the move. I mean, there was no point for China to do that so long as Taiwan does not declare independence. But however, I'm sharing with you this concern inside China is that while China does not have the intention or timetable to invade Taiwan, I mean, the biggest concern in China is that the US will do things to push the two countries towards this conflict.
Can you talk about Ukraine just for a second?
Yeah.
I think it was February 2022 when Putin was there for the Beijing Games and they signed this no limits friendship and all. What's in this for China? Why do they want to be so? I mean, again, they try to say that they're neutral, but they're not. They're pro-Russia neutral. Let's explain this.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I mean, because, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has nothing to do with China. So as a Chinese, and also as an observer of China's politics, I find it very I find it sort of ridiculous that China, is seen as sort of being sort of what's that word, to sort of club together with Russia. And that's one thing. The second thing is that about China's growing ties with Russia. Before I talk about that, I want you guys I remind you guys of a book written by one of the greatest visionaries in the United States. His name is, his given name, I find it very difficult to pronounce. Well, anyway, his surname is Brzezinski.
Zbigniew.
Yeah.
Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yeah. He was the national security advisor to Carter. And then in 1995, he published a book called The Grand Chessboard, Americans' Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. You know, if you guys have not read that book, you should read that book. Because in that book, he outlines the sort of scenarios for US moving forward. And that in that book, remember 25 years ago, he published that book in 1997, that he said the worst case scenario for the United States will be alliance among China, Russia, and Iran. And those three countries clubbed together, not because of their shared ideology or values, because of their shared grievances against the United States. And this is happening right now, that the US is pushing the three countries together. And in that book, Brzezinski said that alliance would be led by China. You know, if you look at the world map, this China, Russia, Iran, and now another critical part of the puzzle also falls into place, that is Afghanistan. So it's like Russia, Iran provides energy, raw materials to China. And then sort of China supplies the products to those countries. That's one point. The second point I want to make is that I have a lot of friends in China, and most of my friends, we don't have any views. We don't have any anti-American views. I mean, it's unlike that, I think we, as someone who have been an observer of China-US relations, I find it very sad that the two countries have gone so, sort of have strayed so far away. And then, it has come to a point right now is that in the US, if you say anything fair and sensible about China, you will be called a panda hugger. And the same thing is in China. If you say anything fair and sensible about US, you will be called a capitalist running dog. Come to think of this, how we have come to this. And because of China's history with Russia, the Soviet Union and Russia are not well liked in China. I think people like the US better. But if you go talk to the China I mentioned, the real China, if you go and talk to people, the people will tell you that they want China and the US to get along better. Not a lot of people want to get along with Russia. That's the China you guys read online. The real China is different.
I notice we've reached our 2 o'clock hour. Give one last question here. Quick one.
Just staying with Ukraine, why the call with Zelensky now what's Xi Jinping's aim, do you think, or his goal here? Is it the case that he's kind of on a roll after the Saudi-Iran talks as peacemaker?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, now China's domestic politics is over. I think China really wants to improve its image, amend ties with the West. So this is all part of the geopolitical game that China is playing, is that China wants to bring Russia and Saudi Arabia together. China wants to have a bigger role in the Middle East. And if, there is a big if, right? If China really can bring Putin and Zelensky together, right? As I said to some friend the other day, if China really does that, it's probably a low probability thing. But if China really does that, that's a Nobel Peace Prize candidate stuff. I think, as I said, it's just to wrap up this, right? Just back to the point I made. I believe in the next 2 or 3 years that China will take this conciliatory approach at home and abroad. This is something that I've been saying for the past few months, and I think this is what's going to happen, likely.
Well, Wang Changwei, you know that here at the FCC we invite all views, so we're neither yellow nor blue, and it's reflected in our colors, which are yellow and blue.
Yeah.
And we want to give you a gift inside a bag. And thank you for coming here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.